Voter, lifelong resident, taxpayer, and educator at Amarillo ISD. I'm also president of the Amarillo Education Association, and coming before you today on behalf of AEA, our teachers union. I know you as a board and our district administration have grappled with this issue for a long time. It's definitely a difficult situation facing our community. We've had our own discussion within our union, and I think everyone can agree closing schools would be devastating, even if we end up at that point. Our position is that right now, our union can get behind the tax ratification election, do what we can to help you guys get that passed, to get us some of the funding that we need because of the antiquated and inequitable funding systems within our state. Our encouragement for you would be to hold off on closing schools. We think there needs to be more discussion and a long-term plan, even if there is school consolidation. We think that's something that should take more than even a single year, because it will impact our community for decades. One negative example is more than 50 years ago when the Carver schools were initially closed, and that caused people to leave the neighborhood, and that neighborhood hasn't ever recovered in terms of culture or financial stability, because for so long there wasn't a neighborhood school. That has been the cultural cornerstone of our city for decades, and any neighborhood that has a school closure is likely to face lots of vacancy and economic decline that would not be something we could recover from. So we do, from our union, endorse the idea of a TRE to give us a boost of funding while a long-term plan is created. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Brittany Arambula. Hope I said that right, Brittany.
Good afternoon. My name is Brittany Arambula, and I am a parent and educator here in Amarillo ISD. And I'm addressing the board this afternoon to request that the board consider postponing the closure of campuses or the consolidation of programs and positions. I'm a music teacher here with AISD. My husband is an orchestra director. Our oldest already participates in the orchestra program, and we are concerned at the thought of consolidating programs, getting rid of programs. I believe that it would diminish the quality of education that our students receive. Before we consider that, please consider putting forth the tax ratification election and or the bond election again. I know that's not something that the community has supported the last time that came up, but I feel that this is an issue that the community really needs to hear about, that we really need to come together and understand that the quality of education for our students is at risk. Teachers are already struggling to service the students that we have in our classes. Increasing class sizes and the number of students on campuses is going to make that even more challenging. So please, as you go forth, I know this is a really difficult decision for y'all to make, and a conversation that I wish that we weren't having, but please keep that in mind as we go forth. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, if there's no other public comment, we'll move to our lone agenda item. Consider taking action to provide administration with direction regarding next steps in pursuing possible options to address declining enrollment, including tax ratification election, bond election, school closures or consolidation, program position consolidation, public-private partnerships, and advocating for legislative action to provide additional funding for public schools. Doug, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I don't want to rehash what anything that you've already heard. I think maybe we go back and just recap some of the data really quickly about why we're here. If you remember, in 2006 we had 30,000 kids. In 2016 that had grown to 34,000, And remember, that was predominantly being fueled by the refugee influx that we were getting at the time. Shortly after that, there was an administration change, and we started to see a decline. We went into COVID, and really coming out of COVID, much like other districts across the state, just never saw a recap and a regrowth of students. And so here we are in 2024, and we're right below 29,000 kids. When you look at that, refugee population is a portion of that. A large portion of that is when you look at just the AISD boundaries within the city of Amarillo. In 2010, we had 169,508 residents. In 2020, it had decreased to 168,182. The age distribution in Potter County, which is predominantly where our attendance zone lies because we were originally the county school district, every age population 0 to 54 has decreased. Ages 55 plus have increased. So you see that distribution changing. Households actually shrunk by about 250 households down to 66,376. Population under 18 has decreased by over 3,000 students. The household size 10 years ago was 2.5. Today it's 2.1. And then as we've talked about, just watching the birth rate in our attendance zones decline, we've watched it decline by over 20%, from the 2010 to the 2020 census. The latest birth rate information we've seen is still preliminary. Coming out, they're still pretty flat. We're not seeing a COVID bump yet, as we've all affectionately hoped we might see. However, it is that those numbers are a little bit early. It'll probably be the next round of birth rates before we see if there's a bump there. So that's a quick, just sort of recap of where we are. I'll be glad to recap anything or just answer questions. Daniel, why don't you and Kevin come to the mics, just because I don't want to be alone. Chris, you might come step. Those are probably... Well, I want to give you accurate and correct information, and sometimes this team will tell you my mouth will overload my brain a little bit, and I'll give you not quite the right number, but I want to make sure we're doing that today. Daniel has a little spree in his step.
Daniel, is there any new information you want to share with us?
Not from last Monday.
Not from last Monday.
Do we want to, Daniel? Since I'll prod just a little bit. Let's talk a little bit how you found. And again, I want to get really clear today. This is February the 19th. You typically wouldn't see projected budgets till April 19th, somewhere in that neighborhood, because it takes that long to get things cleaned up, to reconcile. Predominantly, I don't know where Mr. Taylor, there's Mr. Taylor, how can I miss him? It takes that long for HR to reconcile all the teacher vacancies, openings, the absorptions that we'll take. And so this preliminary budget will continue to change until Daniel's really certain that he's reconciled all of the numbers. If you go back to our workshop, if you'll remember, on that day, we were projecting $2.3 million deficit. But remember, that was really preliminary. From that workshop until we met last week, I'm gonna let Daniel talk about what changed and how that ended up being a little bit in the black for about $4,000.
Okay, do you guys have all that from Monday?
Is there something?
I can give it to you if you don't.
Give it to them, I might not have it. Yeah, I want to make sure they can see it.
So in trying to hash out the differences between what you saw in January and what you see in February, really the biggest changes are revenue, total revenue, and the change in personnel number. And the reason those change so much is because really when I start that process, I'm going to update everything in the current year as I know it today, and then allow the projections to play out formula driven in my spreadsheet, okay? for the out years after this current year. And so what you saw in January, the revenue numbers are different and the change in personnel number is different. When we came together in January, I was reporting to you a change in personnel of $1.2 million on the decreased level. Whereas when we show it in February, that number is now ballooned or decreased to $2.5 million. And that's purely a product of the dates. Chris let me know that on February 1st, HR pulls enrollment information and uses that number to project next year's staffing patterns. That is a change that occurred from the 2 times that we met. And so as we continue to go from February to March to April, these numbers are going to fluctuate, all of them. So if we're looking at February's number, the 24-25, the big, what I kind of was echoing to you last Monday was that it would be my goal right now to get the revenue numbers as close as I can get them. Because we can make choices in expenditures when we know how much I think we're going to receive. And so what is built in there is an enrollment decline, okay, of I can tell you exactly. An enrollment decline of 518 students, and that's driven, I'm sorry guys, 436 students, 436. And that's driven purely off the demographic report that we had last spring. However, I will let you know, Les Hoyt has been here trying to do his own demographic studies as we bring all this information to you. It closely matches what he's producing too, and I don't have any reason to doubt Les's work. So it's good to know that from 2 different sources we're getting very similar results. Average daily attendance, which is what our state funding is driven off of. Average daily attendance would be every day what the enrollment is on that day and who's present at school. Multiply that out times 172 school days, you get average daily attendance. The value that I'm using for next year is down 318. So the enrollment drop is bigger than the ADA drop, and that's also because I'm projecting higher attendance rates for next year than I did this year. No different than I did this year over last year. When you look historically at our attendance rates, where typically we were hovering around a 95, 96% attendance rate. After COVID, that dropped to 91. But as we see years after COVID continue, the attendance rate is going from 91, 92. Right now, I think we're hovering right around 93% attendance. Do you have a question, Mr. Gaines? Oh, sorry.
I'm listening intently.
Okay. So, even though enrollment drops, as attendance gets better, the gap between enrollment and average daily attendance gets smaller, and so we're able to capture more revenue in that scenario.
So what's the enrollment rate you based that on then for next year?
The ADA number?
Yeah,
it's, I'm sorry, 26,371. So 26,371 in average daily attendance.
Which is what percent?
90.
But this year it's hovering around.
Are you talking about 100? I'm sorry?
I thought you said that.
Yeah. It's right. I think it's probably running around 93. We just got 4-6 weeks ended last Friday or last Thursday.
And you're projecting it lower next year?
Higher.
You said 90?
Yeah, coming out of COVID, we were way lower than our historical average. And every year since COVID, we've slowly built that back up to what we used to be.
But is it fair to say that when you build a budget, Daniel, you're building it conservatively? And so
definitely.
If the attendance rate is projected to be 93 or 94%, he's building the budget at 90%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're being very, very conservative.
Yes, okay. Yeah.
That's
It's
what
always
I was
nice to be
confused
able to
about.
get out there, Mr. West.
So, and like the $2 million deficit, for example, that I'm bringing you in January is going to be extremely conservative, worst case scenario in all forms, revenue, expenditures, because what I don't want to do is bring you something and then come back. It would be my intent not to come back and show worse than I showed you a prior time. So it really, most of the time from our January meeting to our February meeting was spent trying to predict revenue for next year and then the years 25, 26, 27, 28. Other things that are built in there that we talked about last week, decreased investment income, decreased other source revenue because of the Medicaid reimbursement program being cut. That's actually a program between the state and the federal government, and that has nothing to do with school districts.
Yeah, we need to pause. It's not the right time, but you all need to keep in mind when you hear comments about school districts are losing Medicare because of accounting error. Please understand, that's not our error. That was the state's error with the feds, but it's being portrayed as a school district error, and it is not. It is a state error that they're having to correct with the feds, and so because they're having to correct it, we'll see less money. Not a place to get deep into that discussion, but just know that's not on our backs, that's on the state's backs. Or maybe it is on our backs, it's just not our fault.
The other piece that I included in there on other sources is the loss of something called indirect cost revenue. And when I mentioned that on Monday, as we spend down ESSER money, we spend that in a dedicated fund for ESSER. It's got its own accounting treatment, its own set of books. But because we're spending money in ESSER, we are allowed to claim something called indirect cost in the general fund. Well, when we no longer spend ESSER, we no longer capture indirect cost in the general fund. And so that is projected in here to be decreased in the out years as well. So really all we're doing is getting back to years prior to COVID as it relates to revenue.
And this is probably an important point to remind everyone, you're not in control of revenue. The state is. Unlike, as the city contemplates new projects, street projects or whatever they contemplate, one of the things they have at their disposal, if they were to decide to raise our taxes, they have the ability to raise, and I don't know the exact percentage, but it's 3.5% that their city council can raise revenue. You don't have that luxury, that ability to raise. You are the only, to my knowledge, you're the only elected governing board that can't raise revenue. And so as we go into this next fiscal year, we're still operating under the same revenue that we operated on in 2019. And if you adjust that for inflation, that's the same buying power as 2014. And you guys, outside of calling for a tax ratification election, really don't have any way to affect that revenue other than to advocate with the legislature to change the funding formula. That's all driven from Austin.
Daniel, I think, just for the record, a TRE would generate how much more revenue per year?
If you do the maximum allowable, it'd be about $16 million.
16 million. That's with the 9 cent increase.
9 cents. Yeah.
That would make us able to change those 2% numbers for increases to larger numbers for increases for our staff. That would allow us to not have to cut many programs or any programs or that kind of thing.
Yeah, those would all be allowable with those funds.
Yeah, what would be our plan for that $16 million specifically? If a TRE were to be passed, where do we see us utilizing those funds?
From my standpoint, it would just be to relieve some of the pressure that's being placed on you right now as far as making a decision.
Those are just M&O dollars, aren't they?
That's right. In the event that you felt like we needed more time to assess this would relieve pressure on making a choice today and allow you to come to the table at another time. Certainly you would have a plan for it, but from my standpoint, it's not so much 24-25, it's 27-28 and beyond that would be concerning today. It would relieve some of that pressure. Obviously this would look a lot different if you had that. But
Daniel, can you take just a second and explain how that 16 is divided and how that it is not all from
it's not all
the
local and it's
residents.
not all state, right? So the 16 million is divided up. About $9 million of that would come from local taxpayers and about 7 million coming from the state. So when you increase your tax rate above what the state sets, that is elected locally. Voters have chosen to tax themselves more than what the state says. So the state comes in and rewards that taxing effort by giving you additional state funding. And so it's about 9 million in local tax collections, about 7 million in state funding.
What is that, about 66%?
I think, yeah, that's what we said.
Is that what-
Yeah, I didn't go back and look, but a little less than 50% on the state side.
Daniel, this decrease in payroll, is that through attrition again?
Yes. Yeah, always. And that would be the big difference from January to February, is after HR's had an opportunity to kind of assess on their own timeline that they already use how we're going into next year.
Yeah, and I never wanted an opportunity to pass to express our appreciation to Doug and your team, Mr. Tatum. how appreciative we are for you doing that. It doesn't take long of research to go read a Fort Worth Star Telegram article about other districts that are not handling the situation in the same manner that you are. So hopefully I appreciate how the way we're treating our employees and doing the best that we can by it.
It's a good team.
It is, but I don't ever want to miss the opportunity. As much as I appreciate that, and I don't lose sight that that's on the backs of our teachers and in the classrooms. Our goal is to keep our district upright and on the positive side of the ledger, but at the same time, it's having dramatic impacts in the classroom. And I don't ever want us to lose sight of what it means to go from a class size of, 18 to 23 or 24. That doesn't sound like a lot. For those who think that's not a big deal, I'd love for them to come volunteer in one of those pre-K classrooms to see what a change of just 2 or 3 kids can do to a makeup of a classroom. So don't want to lose sight of that in this hard discussion.
Couple of comments, Daniel. The government ESSER money has really masked our situation. This was occurring 3 and 4 years ago.
That's a fair statement, yeah.
That's a fair statement?
I think we've been able to cover our challenges with some ESSER money, yes.
Yeah. Second issue, I understand the revenue side, so if I'm looking at this correctly, we go into a deficit 25-26 of $2,000,006, 26-27, $6 million, and then $8 million, and 26-28. So on the expense side, what was impacted during those times between the current situation to anything?
So from 4 years ago to today, or from what you're looking at to 27?
I'm talking about from 24 to 25, 24, 25 through 28.
What's driving the deficit?
Yeah.
So there is a 2% raise built in for all of those years.
That's what?
A 2% raise.
Yeah.
And so that's, $4.8 million and then 4.8 plus 2%. So, it compounds on top of itself every year. There's other things that have trended in there. Utilities trending up 3% per year. Property insurance trending up 10% per year. I haven't built in any interest rate decline.
Yeah.
On expenditures. There is no interest on any of our expenditures.
So it's basically personnel.
Yes. Yeah.
And so while $8 million is a lot of money, our reserve is how much?
$148 million.
And the policy is requiring how much?
It requires us to put an unassigned fund balance 25% of that amount.
So
or 25% of our
what's that
operating
in absolute dollars?
About $70 million.
So we have way excess.
We have a healthy fund
So
balance.
someone might say, what's the problem?
Well, I think first we need to talk about what you've decided that fund balance is there for. So
Yeah.
much of that is assigned fund balance.
Yeah.
Now, nothing to say you couldn't wave the magic wand and unassign it today, and all of a sudden you have that kind of funds. But I see my Landrigan group out there, and I was at Landrigan this morning, and we talked about those reserves a little bit. And I said, so for example, we've got an HVAC fund balance that's incorporated in that 70 million or so that Daniel was talking about. And everybody says, well, just spend that on staff until your air conditioning and heating goes out, and then you have no way to replace that. And so most of what's the majority of those funds, we as a board at some point has said it's important that we don't have to go back to taxpayers, when we need to replace HVAC units or replace filter or replace, the other $4 million a year that we put into capital outlay to keep our buildings up and running. And so we've set aside that kind of money. And so that's where the majority of that is. So I don't want to leave the impression we just got $70 million out there that we're collecting interest on and growing. It is there for a purpose. You purchased 2 board meetings ago new passenger buses.
Yeah, charter buses.
Charter buses.
If you look at page 3, you can see kind of where he's going.
So
Amtrak
that is where that comes from.
So of that reserve, it's a little bit misleading in that because there's specific allocations that beat that reserve up. Is that fair statement?
It is a fair statement. I can look at it quickly, Don, without getting.
That's okay, I'm just saying.
Okay.
So again, if you didn't know that, you would say, well, you guys got way
Yeah.
excess money. So those
Yes.
reserves are really allocated for specific
Private
and
future
contingent
expenses.
liabilities, as you said, going forward.
Is there a part of it that's unassigned?
Yeah, there is, and that was, I can't give you that hard number today, but there's probably, Daniel, is it fair to say there's $9 million probably in there that really is,
Unallocated.
has not been wrapped around safety, HVAC, those kinds of expenses.
Yes.
So that,
Yeah, if you look at page 3, there's, after all assignments and designations, there's $200,000 that we did not assign or designate, but what Doug's talking about, I believe, is the one that we placed in future capital needs. We don't necessarily, can't tell you what those future capital needs are today, but the roofing project that you approved at last week's board meeting, some of the HVAC replacement on that roof project is coming out of assigned fund balance, that $9 million. So yes, that we dedicate it for that purpose and we spend it for that purpose. Same with field turf, we'll probably bring to you at some point in the next year too.
Reserves are a little bit coming from the banking business. It's a little bit misleading because it's really either deferred maintenance or surprises. So you could find yourself in a shortfall real quick. You could hang upon some disaster going through the campus.
Sure.
Is that fair
that
statement?
absolutely fair.
Yeah.
I think it's also, sorry, Don, I hope you're done. So in your projected budgets, the 25-26 budget would be the first year that we would be approaching a deficit. That's also the first year after the next legislative session, which could change everything.
Of course.
Because this is a relatively new board seeing these projections, I will tell you, I've been watching these projections for 20 years now, and it is not uncommon that when you get to that 25-26 school year, we see these kinds of, these aren't nearly as astronomical kinds of deficits that I've seen historically here. And what we know is typically there will be a legislative session, and the legislature will do something, and based on what they do allows us to find ourselves to get back into the black, because they are the ones that control our funding source.
And we're not alone in these kind of projections, right?
Oh, no, we're not.
Or actually, we might be close to alone because others look worse.
Yes, yeah.
And when we met this time last year about the 22-23 budget, or 23-24 budget, I was projecting a 24-25 deficit similar to what I have for 25-26. I mean, when you experience it actually occurring, you can make much better at projections. I mean, this time last year, 24-25 was 24 months away, and now we're here. So as time moves on, you get better figures to work off of. And, what I'm projecting obviously is worse than what actually happens.
And so Daniel, our revenue's fixed. I don't think we can control these expenses.
Yes, yes. Without, as a 7-member board sitting here, yes.
Except for a TRE.
And you can call an election, but obviously,
That requires the voters.
Yeah, it does, but it
But we as a board.
for-
yeah, you can.
And so the alternatives are to meet this, Mr. Superintendent.
Well, I told the Landrigan group this morning, despite where my recommendations are, and they really haven't changed, I'd love, since we're going out across the airways, I'd love to say, I can guarantee we can see a pathway not to close schools. I don't see that pathway. Doesn't mean I see that we need to do it now, but there's not anything within the city limits of Amarillo that sends a message to me that says we're going to have growth. Doesn't mean it won't happen, you just don't see it. There's no new housing, I need to be careful. There are a few new housing developments that sit within our attendance zone that a normal, young family could purchase and move into in terms of new additions. And so the day's going to come that we're going to have to make some really tough decisions. I just struggle whether that is now done. And so I think I used the analogy of a longer runway last week, and we just, in my opinion, and I recognize I'm one, and I'm not even a voting member on this one. We just need a longer runway, because the schools that you might decide to consolidate today because they have the smallest, as things continue to play out within the neighborhoods, those could change, and likely will change. There are schools that I can look at that have the lowest enrollment today that you might think about, let's consolidate. But when I recognize the other schools within that quadrant or within that triangle, they're at capacity or they're close to capacity, the truth is that might not be the right school to merge with. In a few months, a few years down the road, we may have a clearer picture of campuses that we would want to merge together, that would make more sense and long-term for the city. And so I think there's an opportunity. We could absolutely close schools for next year, but I think there's some opportunities to look at maybe before you get there, or maybe not. I think what are the hopes and dreams of community members, and within that it comes around neighborhood schools and other wants that we've talked about, and so that brings you right up to the edge of, do we ask for a TRE election? Do we ask for a bond election? And when you have those elections, based on what you're hearing from your stakeholders, when that election is over, assuming you can get more than 10% of your voters to turn out, you have a pretty clear direction of where you're going to move forward and what's next. So I think you have a TRE and a bond to consider. And then you have a legislature who, in my opinion, has to do something next January that may change the basic allotment, that may change the way schools are funded. And when that happens, it might change the focus of which schools we ought to consolidate. But I think it would be dishonest of me to look at this group and say, I see a path where we're never going to close schools, because I don't.
So, I don't think anybody wants to close schools.
I don't think so either, sir.
I don't. So, if I read the material that you've given us, it's not really an alternative, because if you combine schools, other than the culture issues and the economic issues, from a functional standpoint, they're still dysfunctional, right?
Yes,
because
sir.
you need to either
Because of
expand
size.
it. We don't have the capacity to, right? Am I
You're
reading that right?
absolutely correct.
So really, is this a fair statement? Combining and closing schools is not an option?
So,
Oh, no, it's not a good option.
Okay.
Because I don't ever want to mislead. So let's get, if closing schools would say, remember, average school, average number, $4 million to run a school a year, an elementary school. When you consolidate, you're going to save $1.3 million. The rest of that is still going to be expenditure, mostly caught up in teachers. But one of the things we've not gotten to, a really ugly idea, is you take a school, instead of merging them and pairing them, you could piecemeal them out. And so I don't want to look at you, Don, and say it's not an option, because
Yeah,
it is.
I
But it's a
appreciate
really, in my opinion, it's a really bad option, because you would take that school and this street of kids would go here, this street of kids would go here. You might even put busing in. I mean, it's doable.
And you have portable classrooms
Yeah.
and some other things, options that you
Yes,
can
sir.
do. But the way it stands, without making some tough decisions, I get it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
our total budget's 300 million, right? Am I reading this right?
Yeah, 289, 293.
Yeah, round up,
Right, 300 million.
few million, right?
My run
So-
goes to 4. Why is that?
Yeah.
All funds is 4.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, what
West.
is the 4? Is it
That's
400?
all funds, general fund, debt service fund,
Oh,
food
okay.
service fund, title, debt service.
So, Don, this is what I was talking to Mr. Loomis about earlier. The savings of $1 million is what we're talking about, right?
Give or take.
Because we'd have to spend 300,000 or so on portables and those kind of things. In a $300 million budget, And with so many unknowns, the unknown of is our city willing to step up and support our schools? We have one of the lowest tax rates in like schools, one of the lowest tax rates in the Panhandle. Am I misstating? Is that right?
That is correct. We have our INS rate is right at 16 cents, and I'm just grasping here. Canyons is right at 26%. Hey, I've got a team, don't I?
Yeah.
I got a team. Canyons at 26. Highland Park, 32 cents. Bushland, 36 cents. If you want to go all the way to Lubbock Cooper, which is sort of in our neck of the woods, it's who everybody wants to be. In terms of facilities, they're at 50 cents, which is statutory maximum.
Yeah, I agree with you, Joel. I think it's right. I think clearly, at least I've come to the conclusion, TRE, having said all that, I want to make sure that we've exhausted everything else.
Right.
Where I can look at a taxpayer and say, look, we've attempted to cover this gap in lots of ways, and we've come to the conclusion that this is the best route, and we need you guys to support it. Then I think we need to be good stewards of that $16 million and think about what happens the next year and the next year and the next year. So we don't have to do it again next year and the next year, and that's part of that planning. But I think it's important. One other question too, I want to be sure I'm understanding all the 5 alternatives that you talked about, including the public-private partnership. In my analysis of that, it's a non-starter.
Yeah, it
And
is.
I don't see that as a really viable option because it has to be done every year.
Yeah.
And the dollars associated with it,
Don,
maybe I'm wrong.
No.
I'm just one guy. I could be.
I want to be careful. I think it's viable, but it's not a fix. It's sort of like
I don't think we have time.
getting your cake and getting to eat it too. You know, it's one of those where that really came from. It came from a whole different place, but where it's ended up in our discussions is I recognize what's going to happen to neighborhoods when we vacate a building. I mean, we've seen it in this community when we didn't go back and put a school in that neighborhood or adjacent to that neighborhood. And so I recognize what's going to happen. And so that came out of one of those brainstorming sessions. So how are you good stewards? How do you keep the neighborhood from taking a step backwards? And the best answer I can give today is not demolishing the school, not just walking away from it and boarding it up, but looking at our community and looking for a way to create a partnership that would allow that building to thrive and support the community. In my world, it would be support us from birth to about 3 years old. Now, somebody in the community might say, you know, that's not kind of where our mission is, but here is our mission, and here's how it would support that community, and here's what it would look like. Let's build this partnership, because the truth is, if I get ready to, if somebody would say, well, just sell them the building. Well, one, they probably can't afford it because they're a nonprofit, or likely they're a nonprofit. Two, if I get ready to sell it, there are certain entities that have first dibs on a building as we move out of them. And so that we might not be able to, and because, you know, competitive sealed bids, there's no, if we get ready to sell something, there's no guarantee, you know, somebody might be able to get that property. So anyway, I'm talking.
Can you point us to a public-private partnership that's been successful in public schools?
Well, I don't know that yes, there are some out there. I think what we're doing with Storybridge right now is a public-private partnership that we have to support our soon-to-be parents. And I think we've got lots of initial data. It hadn't been in place long enough to know is it really going to make them readers by 3rd grade. But it'll be interesting to be able to track those kids in another 3 years. Lisa, will be that long, 3 or 4 years to know did that partnership. And so I think there are other partnerships that Snack Pack is a place that is, well, I don't know that it's been public-private.
Yeah, I think but I'm talking about revenue, big dollars.
Yeah, no.
I'm talking about things that we're talking about.
But when you think about it, and I don't want to use nonprofits out there, but think about a nonprofit that's already functioning. Maybe they provide daycare. They're a nonprofit that provides daycare or early childhood development that's already out there. The problem is, you know, their facility or where they deliver that is you know, we're picking on Somerset, so, you know, it's all the way in the southwest end of town. What would that look like if they could move that operation into one of our facilities? And I get, it's a big wish, it's a big vision, but I think it's an opportunity for at least to have discussions on how do you support a community that is declining? Because here's the truth. If all of a sudden you woke up and you and again, dream, not reality, you can take a school and convert it into affordable daycare, maybe round the clock daycare. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how we get there, but does that give people the incentive to think, wow, I will move back into that old neighborhood. I will, instead of looking for a newer home, I'll buy an older home. You know, is there a way to reinvest?
I think Midland did something in the 80s, similar to that. So another alternative is cutting programs.
Yeah. Yes.
And so that would get into deep in the heart.
That would just drive a dagger.
We're talking about, give me an example of programs.
I would
You don't
tell
want
you
to.
no.
They're all
But
good.
every time I use a position, I use a program, somebody says, the superintendent's already decided that. And I'm going to tell you, we don't have any that I
But
want.
generically, it's programs that we'd have to cut.
Yeah, all of us can find programs.
So dollars are not big in that?
They're big because they're tied up in personnel.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes they're tied up big in equipment and expenses as well, but that's still minuscule.
So
Which
we would be the
means-
same
which
school
means
district
there's a-
that distinguishes us.
It
if
does
we cut
distinguish
programs.
us. You know,
And, I mean, that's what we're about.
it is what we're about. I can't fathom cutting
That's
programs.
what separates us from the athletics and the band, all those things that we take pride in.
You know, we have things, I probably sent you a list, and somewhere in all this, I probably have the list of more. I hope people, I sent that list to you, just of more, that was in something else I sent you. But the list goes on and on. And I can't fathom. I watched this weekend, because we've not been in Skills USA for a while. And now that Amtech's rolling, I wish somebody was here, and I'll misquote, but a year ago we had 12. Today we've got hundreds that were in Lubbock this weekend participating in Skills USA and being successful, and they're on their way to their next level. Those are all things that we want for our kids. And the thought of cutting one of those just cuts it very quick of who we are. But I don't want you to forget, when we're not doing any of this, teachers are still filling this in the classroom. And I'm, depending on what your directive to me is today, Daniel, we're committed to, we're not going to be in a RIF. And somebody the other day said, you said RIF 15 times. What is that? That's educators' terms to layoffs. Firing is layoffs. We're not going that way. We can get there through attrition. We've built a raise. It's not a large raise, but we also have, for those that have been with us since the beginning of COVID, next year will get their last installment of incentive pay that you paid. So it'll be more than a 2% next year for continuing employees, not for new employees.
So those are the live alternatives that you mentioned.
Yeah.
So do you have a timeline if we?
Yes. And again, I hate giving you things that are my work products because it
You don't have to
makes
give
me
me
feel like.
but you're thinking about it.
No, I actually have to.
Before you go there, can I add some,
Pick one of those.
before you go there, Doug, can I add some questions?
Yeah, you absolutely can.
Because it kind of is along that line. We've talked about the birth rate decline, we've talked about the refugees, but what I'm hearing from you is, with all things considered, we are eventually, as best as we can see, we are headed toward eventually,
Yes,
as
ma'am.
much as all of us hate this, there's gonna have to be something, some closure, some consolidation, some.
Short of a hope of funding, the revenue stream changing, and it has to change permanently for that to happen. Even a TRE at $16 million, no matter how conservative we are and frugal we are with that over the next, decade, somewhere along the way, that money's going to be expended, and you're going to be standing on the other side of this.
Exactly.
If the revenue doesn't change, and again, it's got to be about, because at that point, you will have no tools left to raise local tax dollars. It'll all be the state's ability.
And short of some type of development or something that brings in housing for people with small children, I mean, we don't see anything beyond that 16 million.
Or the rebirth of Potter County.
Yeah.
Would
Yeah,
it
that's what-
normally be quick enough or possibly even enough with the rate at what it is?
Yeah, and that is absolutely correct, Connie.
Okay, I'm going to ask a very difficult question, and
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No,
I mean, I just want us to have all of our cards on the table here.
Yes, ma'am.
If we're going to take out a TRE and talk about it to our community, we have to have all of these answers. And I think Dawn has touched on the management of those TRE funds.
Yeah.
And if we are publicly, I mean, not that we say things that aren't public, but I'm saying we're being very transparent here that that's an eventual reality. So if I'm not here looking at all these numbers and doing all this, I'm going to ask the question: if we know that's an inevitable, and it's a hole we're putting money into, how do we justify saying we're cutting and really being conservative with those TRE funds? And I heard you say something a while ago, and I forgot what, but you said something to the effect of, if something changes certain schools, then it would not, So can you elaborate on that and just give us a deeper?
Yeah, deeper. If you can go back to, there was a working document our team put together of what ifs, if you'll recall, of who
Barely.
pairings, and we didn't go deeper than pairings, and we absolutely could have gone deeper. I don't think we need that, guys. But if we could have gone deeper, there are no significant pairings that you can put together today with certainty that those are going to continue to decline and make it a good pairing.
Okay, but would there ever be a
Yeah,
place in the future that we could?
Yeah, I believe if trends stay where they are today, based on the algorithms that we've put together, we would believe that, in 3 years to 5 years, there's going to be clear places across our community where those pairings can take place. And there's ample room. At that point, enrollments will have dropped enough. Because remember, our schools are built for 500-ish. Most pairings that we would put together today would bounce over 600. And so that would cause you to have to build classrooms, add portables, add storm shelters, all sorts of myriads of things. In 3 to 5 years, but if trends don't turn and become more positive, they continue where they're going, there will be 10 to 20 schools that you can look at pairing together. And then at that point, you start to make educational kinds of decisions. Where in these pairings can you put our alternative classrooms for our most needy kids, our autistic classrooms? Where does that fit without having to uproot those kids? Because truly, today, if you were to give me the directive to pair schools next year, some of my biggest concerns would be, how does that affect our most challenged and needy kids in terms of consolidating schools? Because you probably don't have the room to merge all that together today. And so that means moving those units, somewhere else, moving classrooms somewhere else.
So you're saying if there's a greater decline, that there would be more room to pay, is what,
Yeah.
okay.
At some point, we're gonna there are gonna be more options, and there are gonna be better options. There's never gonna be a better option. I'm sorry I said it that way, but it'll from a truly number standpoint and capacity, without having to add to the envelope of the building, there will be many more alternatives than you have today.
And in my understanding, if we decide today to do the TRE, or to begin to put it out there as a possibility, as opposed to immediately beginning to work toward closing schools, then we have until August to come back to you and say.
That's right.
And we would have enrollment for next year. We would have some other factors that would be there
Yes,
as
we
well.
would. And Connie, I'm going to make the argument. I don't think we ought to leave here today with the idea that we're going to ask for a TRE or a bond. And maybe it's a little bit semantics, but I think that conversation starts with what are your hopes and dreams for today's kiddos, and that conversation needs to get deep. It needs to be across the community, and undoubtedly, depending on what those hopes and dreams are, you start to hear, but we need this or we need that, and you start having conversations about, are you sure it's worth it? Can we afford it? Is that something we want to do? And by having those conversations, you get to a TRE that everybody can support, versus the superintendent looking at a board of trustees saying, we think it's time to have a TRE. I know it's a little bit semantics, but I think we could get to a point in summer after having these conversations that you would look up and say, we're not ready for a TRE. We're not ready for a bond as a community, and you're going to kick that can to the next opportunity, which would be May of next year, or November of the following of next year. And so it gives you the ability to try to make a decision that we're making together instead of to one another. And maybe it's semantics, and somebody will look and say, he knows what he wants, and I don't. What I want is what our community wants. Again, I had lunch with a group, and I said, if that's what you want, I said, you need to articulate that. You need to push for that. You need to make the case of why your kids need X and Y and Z. And let's see if the rest of the community would agree with you. If you'll look at my timeline, somewhere around probably next board meeting, I'm going to recommend that we talk about hiring, and I apologize for this term, but I'm not creative enough to come up with a better one, a PR firm. And it's not about pushing an idea that you got to vote for a bond or you got to vote for a TRE, but we get a professional group that can help us coalesce around what the community is saying in morning. And the truth is, I would be fine in August if it was a really clear message that we don't want a bond, or we don't want a TRE, to have a TRE and a bond. And we live in a democracy, and allow the voters to speak clearly. We don't want this, and because we don't want this, it gives a much clearer picture of actions and steps forward. So if you look at my formalization, today we're formalizing which one of these strategies we're going to focus on. You'll see as early as tomorrow morning, my team will have to start incorporating these strategies. And clearly, if you give me the directive today to close schools or to consolidate schools, you can see as early as Friday, I would ask that we come back together as a board and we formalize that. I'm not suggesting that's what we do. I'm just laying in my mind what's my timeline. You see, by the 1st of March, and these conversations have already started, but we start having this hopes and dreams conversation in our community. On somewhere in late March, we have a community dialogue with our city, county, and school officials. I don't know where that conversation goes, but at least it puts all of the elected officials in one room, and we just talk You know, maybe there's something powerful that comes out of it, or maybe it's just the opportunity for us to have dialogue. I think somewhere I put in here, there's nothing magical about April 1st, but to start to formulate, if and when we have to walk out of schools, you know, who could help me lead in the community this idea about public-private partnerships? And instead of thinking about, you know, if we close 5 schools, 1 in all 5 schools, can we just start thinking small? How do you create one? How do you create a model for one, and then you grow from there? You can see on the 8th, I think that's a board meeting. If we can get an RFP back in, I'm going to recommend we hire a farmer that helps us not push an idea, but communicate an idea. And better yet, how you collect data, you know, formally and informally, so we have an idea of what our community is saying about us. Chris, by the 15th of April, Chris and his team, and my instructional team, we will have finished our kind of informal, formal review of positions and programs. We want to have a budget workshop on the 29th. And again, these are all subject. These are just sort of starting places. Starting to talk about the election will be over on the 10th. Start talking about advocacy work just in terms of how do we ensure people in Amarillo are registered and voting, and what does that look like? You know, on the 13th of May, we approve a budget. On the 10th of June, we'd have an efficiency audit, which I'm excited to get from an outside auditor. If there's going to be a call for an election, that has to happen on the 12th. I think it's actually the 15th, but the 12th will be our typical board meeting. There's an election in November. On December 1, we come back and reevaluate all these strategies. By the 1st of February, we'll have no idea what the legislature is going to do. But at least we might start being able to formulate, do we think there's going to be movement? But we're right back here a year from now formalizing what are the next steps. And so that's sort of the timeline that I use to keep us moving forward in this conversation.
That's very helpful, thank you.
Yeah, that is helpful, but budget approval usually comes in June?
It does, but that's in a legislative session.
Oh, so you're good with that? Yeah. Hey, can I ask, Bob, you got my mic on, Daniel, on the proposed, or on the preliminary budget for 24-25, on payroll expenditures, are there any, or just overall, are there any program and position consolidation figured into that budget?
No.
Just normal
Just
attrition?
normal attrition.
Yeah. So, I mean, y'all do that every year.
We do.
Y'all deal with staffing.
Matter of fact, you got an anonymous email as we came into this board meeting, likely from an administrator, just reading the tone of it and where the IP address came from. And that is, I want to go back to, we can't ask our campuses to do any more with less.
Yeah.
And so.
I mean, I've said this 100 times, and I lived this in high school. Lean is good, too lean is bad. 6'6", 145, that's not good, right? That's not playable, that's not healthy. So too lean, that's why I want to ask this. This isn't built on a more lean staff.
Now, none of the things that we presented to you in January are in this.
Right, good. Just want to make sure. Yeah, that's all I have on that.
But I do, we will get leaner, Doyle. I don't know where, but we will get leaner between now.
In the appropriate places.
In the appropriate
Yes.
places. But there will be harm,
It'll hurt.
It'll hurt.
Yeah, and
It will hurt.
I wish we didn't have to.
I do.
What's the downside of hiring a PR firm now?
Right now, I can't because it's my assumption it'll take an RFP and I'll have to get it on the street. If
So how long does that take?
If I could do it today, I would have recommended we do it as part of this agenda today. I don't see any downside. I think the sooner we can get somebody helping us collect data, helping us have the conversations that that have been in these waters before. I have, in my opinion, the best communications team in the state, but this is not where they excel. They excel in telling our stories and getting the word out, and we need somebody who can help us understand everybody's opinion, not just the few, but the many.
So we've had a lot of discussion, we've wrestled with, is there any other burning question or comment that's keeping any of you from moving on some of this? And if not, does anybody have a motion to move on this? Say that again? Okay. Caleb?
You go ahead.
We can always amend.
Yeah.
So for the 2024-2025 school year, I move to authorize the superintendent to publicly communicate that there will be no campus closures for the 2024-2025 school year and continue to study and solicit community input regarding new or additional revenue streams.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that? Any amendments on that? Any? Like I said, as far as Don has made the point, one of the things that makes Amarillo so unique in the Panhandle especially is that we have programs like orchestra that they're not fluff, they're important. And if you want to, I'll fight you on that. Right? We have swim, and not everybody does, and it's important. It's not fluff, and so I don't think we would want to direct our superintendent to cut those things if at all possible. And positions, I would say that's what y'all do. We don't direct you to do that. That's your job.
Yeah, 100%. Just one comment too. I want to once again express my appreciation for you, Doug, and you and your team. This is hard stuff. It's very difficult, and to the fellow trustees who have spent a lot of time looking at this stuff, thinking about it. It's serious stuff, and thank you to you and your team and everybody that's worked hard on this stuff. And I'm just optimistic, maybe. I think we're going to do what's best for the district. Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
And I appreciate the way you made the motion of continue to study revenue streams. We're not authorizing a TRE. I don't think we can at this date. Well, I guess we could, but it's not on the agenda, so we can't. All right, so I have a motion and a second, and I'll have this language for you if you need it, for the publicly communicate that there will be no campus closures for the 2024-2025 school year and continue to study and solicit community input regarding new or additional revenue streams. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So you have your marching orders.
I have.
And we have
And
some
since
of
all
ours.
the news media is here today, I think they just got the public announcement.
Yeah, there's
But we will, there are communications, we'll
Yeah.
get that out appropriately.
All right. There's nothing else. It's 4:04, and we will adjourn.